Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be taking a look at a topic that I know a lot of you have been requesting for a while now, men's rights. And specifically, we're going to be looking at, those covert contracts that happen in relationships and how to identify them and amend them, and how feminism and Marxism may have played a role in all of this.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of our listeners are really interested in how the institutions we see today, marriage, work, even education, how they might have been shaped by these ideologies and how that affects men now.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the sources that the listener sent over was this book called Men on Strike, and it's kind of like it's kind of the rallying cry for a lot of men out there who feel like the system's working against them. Like they're opting out of marriage, they're opting out of fatherhood, they're even opting out of the workforce because they just don't see things as fair anymore.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about the book is that it doesn't just complain about these things, It actually tries to offer like a historical and societal analysis to explain how we got here.
Okay, so let's dig into that a little bit. One of the things the book talks about is the thing they call the media misandry complex,
Right.
where they're basically saying that the media intentionally portrays men in a negative light.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's making them the butt of the joke or the villains of the story.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like, they give examples like the sitcoms from the 90s where the dad is always like this bumbling idiot.
Right. And the wife is like the smart one who's always, one step ahead.
Exactly. Or even that Ghostbusters reboot from a few years back where pretty much all the male characters were either incompetent or straight up evil.
Yeah, and their point is that this isn't just about entertainment, right? They're saying that this kind of portrayal actually impacts how society views men and ultimately feeds into those covert contracts we were talking about.
Right. It's like if you're constantly seeing men portrayed as incompetent or villainous, it can start to mess with how you see yourself and your role in a relationship, like subconsciously.
Exactly. It becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy. Do you think that's kind of what the book is getting at?
Yeah, for sure. And they also say that this media portrayal isn't just an accident. They argue that it's actually driven by profit, claiming that these negative stereotypes, unfortunately, they sell.
Yeah, which is kind of depressing when you think about it. Like, it's almost like we're being manipulated. And if you're already feeling like you're not getting a fair shake in society, seeing that reinforced on screen, it's got to just make things worse, right?
Definitely. And another big point they make is about double standards, how men are held to different standards than women, particularly in the workplace.
Yeah, they have this whole example about this guy named Mike who gets passed over for a promotion because he's perceived as too aggressive. But then a woman who behaves the exact same way gets praised for being assertive. It's like, what?
Yeah, it's crazy, right? And this ties into the whole idea of navigating those covert contracts in your career, too. What's expected of you as a man might actually be holding you back, even if you think you're doing everything right.
It's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. And the book argues that this double standard extends beyond work, too. It affects how male violence and female violence are perceived. They even bring up the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case.
Oh, yeah, that was a huge one. Really got people thinking about how men and women are treated differently in those situations, especially when it comes to accusations. It definitely brought a lot of these power dynamics to the surface. I mean, every case is unique, of course, but the book raises some good points about the potential for bias, for sure.
Yeah, totally. Now, another area they tackle is the education system. They basically claim that it's failing boys by trying to suppress their natural instincts, like being competitive or needing to move around more.
Yeah, think about it from the covert contract perspective, right? We teach boys to sit still and be quiet in school, but then they go out into the real world and they're expected to be assertive and go-getters in their careers. Like, those are totally mixed messages.
It's like they're being set up to fail before they even start. They tell this really sad story about a 12-year-old boy named Jake who gets suspended for defending himself against a bully, and the bully doesn't even get in trouble.
It's messed up, right? And then they talk about how ADHD is like overdiagnosed in boys and the push for girls in STEM leaving boys feeling like they don't belong. There are a lot of layers to it, for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely complex, but I think the book's point is that the system isn't really designed to meet the unique needs of boys. And that can have some pretty serious consequences down the road.
Yeah, definitely.
Now things get even more intense when the book starts talking about family courts. They claim there's like a systemic bias against men, especially when it comes to custody battles and child support.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And this goes right back to those covert contracts, too. Like, what does it even mean to be a father and a provider in today's world? And how do those assumptions play out in a courtroom where things are supposed to be fair and impartial?
Right. They even share this heartbreaking story about a father who's like struggling to maintain a relationship with his kids after a divorce, even though he's the primary breadwinner. It's like he's doing what he's supposed to do, but the system still screws him over.
Right. That feeling of unfairness is really what the book is trying to highlight. They even bring up this concept of a marriage tax, where men are basically penalized financially just for being married.
Hmm.
It's definitely a provocative claim, and the book is definitely not afraid to challenge conventional wisdom.
Which is interesting because another really controversial issue they talk about is the wage gap. They actually claim that the idea of women making less than men for the same work is a myth.
Yeah, it's a common talking point in the men's rights movement, but it's definitely a complex issue with a lot of nuance to it. Like, the book argues that when you factor in things like career choices, hours worked, and risk tolerance, the gap basically disappears.
They have this anecdote about a guy who gets passed over for a raise even though he's more qualified, and the raise goes to a woman who's less qualified. And they say it's because of this misconception that women need the money more.
Again, it's all about those underlying assumptions and covert contracts playing out in these subtle ways.
So, this whole men on strike argument seems to be really aligning with what a lot of our listeners are interested in, like the men's rights movement and the red pill philosophy. It's about recognizing these systemic disadvantages that men face and trying to create a more level playing field, right?
Exactly. And the book uses these really specific examples to illustrate how these broader social structures and institutions, maybe influenced by feminism and Marxism, are creating this sense of unfairness for a lot of men.
Like they're waking up to these realities and saying, hey, wait a minute, this isn't right. So, with all that in mind, the book then makes this really strong case for reclaiming what they call traditional masculinity. Strength, leadership, stoicism, men as providers and protectors.
And they're not just saying, go back to the way things were. It's more about recognizing the value of those traits in today's world. A world that often tells men to suppress those very qualities. It's about reclaiming your agency as a man.
And they use some really interesting examples like David Goggins, that guy who does those insane fitness challenges, and LeBron James, obviously. Like these guys are at the top of their game and they embody those traditional masculine traits.
Exactly. It all ties back into that idea of amending your own covert contracts. The book seems to be saying that by developing those qualities, you can actually navigate these challenges better and create the kind of life and relationships you really want.
So it's about taking action, not just complaining about the problem, but actually doing something to improve your own situation.
Right. It's about empowerment.
I like that. Now, another thing they talk a lot about is the importance of brotherhood, of male bonding.
Yeah. They call it the brotherhood effect, having strong male friendships. They say it's crucial for men's well-being and success.
They even tell this story about a rugby game where this player gets tackled really hard, but then the guy who tackled him helps him up. And then there's the example of that tech company that was founded by a group of close male friends. They're saying there's real power in male bonding. Like it can help you achieve great things.
It's almost like those bonds allow men to step outside of those covert contracts for a minute. It creates a space where they can just be themselves and support each other and, push each other to be better.
So it's about building that support system, having that brotherhood to help you navigate all the craziness of life and relationships.
Exactly. And they even say these bonds aren't just good for individual men, they're actually crucial for restoring a sense of male solidarity in a world that often pits men against each other.
Yeah, that makes sense. So to bring it back to the whole focus of our deep dive today, which is
Right.
covert contracts, how does all of this relate? It seems like they're trying to lay the groundwork for understanding the bigger forces that are at play, right?
Exactly. The book argues that by understanding these larger structures, the media, the legal system, the pressures men face in different areas of life, you can start to identify those unspoken rules that govern your relationships, especially in a marriage.
So by recognizing those patterns and those biases, you can start to renegotiate the terms of your own covert contract.
Precisely. It's about giving men the framework to analyze their own experiences and understand the context so they can make more informed choices about how they engage in relationships and society as a whole.
It sounds like this book is less about avoiding relationships and more about equipping men to create healthier, more balanced partnerships.
That's a great way to put it. It's about understanding the game so you can play it strategically, so to speak.
Okay, so let's get practical for a minute. Based on what we've discussed so far, what are some things our listeners can actually do to apply these insights? Specifically in terms of amending their own covert contracts.
Well, first and foremost, become aware of that media misandry complex we were talking about. Be critical of how men are being portrayed and, seek out alternative sources of information. Don't just passively absorb what the media is feeding you.
Right, it's about being more discerning, question those narratives.
Exactly. The book also talks about developing those traditional masculine qualities we discussed earlier. Hit the gym, build some strength, join a men's group, find mentors who embody the values you admire. Be proactive.
It's about taking control.
Right.
Not waiting for society to validate you, but building that confidence and resilience yourself.
Yeah, and make those male friendships a priority. Actively foster that brotherhood and find those communities where you can connect with like-minded guys. That support system is crucial.
It all comes back to that brotherhood effect. Having that support network can make all the difference.
For sure. And finally, the book challenges men to really evaluate their roles as providers, protectors, and leaders in their families and communities. It's not about clinging to outdated gender roles, but about consciously deciding how you want to contribute and take responsibility.
Be an active participant in your life and your relationships. Don't just passively accept whatever's handed to you.
Exactly. Remember, you have power in this situation. You're not a passenger, you're a co-creator.
I like that. So it's about understanding the dynamics, understanding those covert contracts, and then being proactive to steer things in a direction that works for both of you.
Exactly. It's about recognizing your own worth and advocating for your needs.
That's a great takeaway. Now, before we jump into part 2, where we'll really dive deep into this whole idea of traditional masculinity, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What's resonated with you the most so far? What stands out?
I think what's really powerful is how the book exposes those unspoken expectations that are placed on men, both by society and by their partners. It's about bringing those expectations to light so they can be addressed and maybe even challenged.
Yeah, shining a light on those covert contracts and giving men the tools to rewrite them.
Exactly.
Love it. All right, well, in the next part, we'll explore how traditional masculinity can empower men to navigate these challenges and create more fulfilling lives. Stay tuned.
Welcome back, everyone. So, as we dig into this idea of traditional masculinity, it's important to remember all that stuff we talked about in part 1, those covert contracts, societal influences. The book argues that a lot of the problems men face today actually come from rejecting those traditional values.
So it's not just about saying, hey, these are good qualities to have. It's like they're saying these qualities are actually essential for men to thrive in a world that doesn't really value them anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And they have this one example that really stood out to me. It's about this guy who literally faced down a grizzly bear to protect his family.
Whoa. Okay, that's intense. So they're trying to show that, courage and strength, those things aren't just outdated relics of the past.
Right, exactly. Like, even though society might try to downplay these things, they're still, fundamental to who we are as humans, especially for men. And when men are discouraged from embracing those qualities, it messes with everything. Their relationships, their careers,
I agree.
even their self-worth.
So going back to those covert contracts, are they saying that men who are more in touch with their traditional masculinity are better equipped to deal with all those unspoken agreements?
I think that's a big part of it. If you're confident in your masculinity, you're less likely to be taken advantage of, less likely to settle for a relationship that doesn't meet your needs.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. They also bring up some historical examples to kind of prove their point. Like they talk about ancient Sparta, where physical strength and military skill were super important. The whole warrior culture thing.
Right. And they're saying those qualities weren't just about fighting. It was about discipline, self-control, a willingness to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself. And those are all still relevant today.
Right. So they're drawing a line from those ancient warriors to the kind of strength and resilience that men need today. Interesting.
Yeah. And they even go a step further. They actually link what they see as a decline in traditional masculinity to a decline in society as a whole.
Okay, now that's a bold statement. What do they base that on?
Well, they point to things like, rising crime rates, social unrest, economic problems. They say that as men have moved away from those traditional roles like provider and protector, everything has kind of fallen apart.
It's definitely controversial, but I can see how some men would relate to that. Like their strengths aren't just being ignored, they're being demonized.
Exactly. And they also address things like the #MeToo movement. They say that while it was well intentioned, it also contributed to this climate where men are almost afraid to be men, like they're walking on eggshells all the time.
It's a complicated issue for sure, but I think it's good to have these conversations and to understand the different perspectives out there, even if they're not popular.
Absolutely. Now, the good news is that the book doesn't just complain about the problem, it actually offers a solution. They say men need to actively reclaim those traditional qualities, reject the messages that tell them to be less strong, less assertive, less masculine.
So it's about taking action,
Right.
not just wishing things were different, but actually doing something to change them.
Right. It's about creating a better future for yourself and for society. And they have some pretty concrete suggestions for how to do that. Like one of the biggest things they emphasize is physical fitness.
Yeah, it's not just about looking good, it's about building that inner strength and confidence.
Exactly. They use David Goggins as an example again. Remember how he transformed himself? They're saying that pushing yourself physically, overcoming challenges, it changes your whole mindset.
So it's like a mind-body connection. You get stronger physically and you feel stronger mentally and emotionally.
Exactly. And they recommend things like martial arts, team sports, even just doing physically demanding work, anything that pushes you outside your comfort zone.
It's about proving to yourself what you're capable of.
Right. And they also talk about mental toughness, things like practicing stoicism, visualizing negative outcomes so you can prepare for them. They say you need to embrace discomfort as a path to growth. Like, don't shy away from the hard stuff.
So build that resilience.
Yeah.
Don't fall apart when things get tough. And they even say men should surround themselves with other men who share these values. Create that brotherhood to support and challenge each other.
It's like having a team. You're all working together towards the same goal.
I like that. So you've got your physical training, your mental training, and then you've got your brotherhood to keep you accountable and on track.
Right. And they tie this back into the covert contracts idea. They're saying that when you're strong and confident and you've got that support system, you're less likely to get trapped in those unhealthy agreements.
It's about creating a life where you're not just meeting someone else's expectations, but living on your own terms.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting. They say that reclaiming traditional masculinity isn't just about personal fulfillment. It's actually about the survival of society.
Whoa. Okay, that's a big claim. What do they mean by that?
Well, they argue that men have always been the ones who build things, protect things, innovate, push the boundaries. And when men are discouraged from doing those things, society suffers.
So it's not just about men being happy. It's about everyone benefiting from men stepping into those roles.
Right. They say men have a unique contribution to make to the world. And when they're allowed to embrace those strengths, everyone wins.
That's powerful. And they connect it back to the covert contract idea too. They're saying that when men are living in alignment with their true nature, they can create healthier, more balanced relationships, ones that are built on respect instead of resentment.
Exactly. Now, in part 3, we'll get into their thoughts on fatherhood and the male provider role. And we'll talk about how those things tie into these covert contracts that are shaping men's lives. Stay with us.
Welcome back, everyone. So we've talked about a lot of the challenges men are facing these days, but let's get down to brass tacks. A lot of our listeners are really interested in those covert contracts. Like, how can guys actually identify them in their relationships and maybe even start changing them?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? The book Men on Strike makes the point that a lot of guys are basically stuck in these contracts without even knowing it. They're playing by these rules that they never agreed to, and that's where all that frustration and resentment comes from.
It's like you're in this game, but you don't even know what the rules are,
Yeah.
and you keep losing.
Exactly. So the first step, according to the book, is to just acknowledge that these contracts exist, to shine a light on those expectations about roles and responsibilities and even emotions within the relationship. Bring it all out into the open.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But those expectations can come from all over the place, right? Like society tells us how to act, we bring baggage from our past experiences, and then there's those biological differences between men and women that the book talks about. It's complicated.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And, we talked about those primal instincts in men, right? That need to provide and protect, to be the leader. Those instincts are still there, but they might not always fit neatly into the modern relationship mold. And that's where the conflict can come in.
So it's like this constant tug of war between who you are at your core and what everyone else expects you to be. No wonder some guys feel like they want to go on strike. So how do you actually start changing those covert contracts?
Well, the book is big on communication, like
Yeah.
really open and honest communication with your partner, having those tough conversations about what's working and what's not. But it's not about blaming each other, it's about understanding each other's needs, you know?
So it's about really listening to what your partner is saying, even if you don't agree with it.
Exactly. And then on the flip side, men need to be more assertive about their own needs, not aggressive, but clear and respectful about what they want from the relationship.
So set those boundaries. Don't be afraid to say, hey, this isn't working for me.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming your power in the relationship. And another thing they talk about is self awareness. You know, you can't really renegotiate a contract if you don't even know what you want.
So do some soul searching. Figure out what's important to you.
Right. Maybe look back on past relationships and see if there are any patterns there. Or even talk to a therapist or counselor. They can help you sort through all that stuff.
Yeah, it's like getting to know yourself all over again.
Exactly. And once you know what you want, you can communicate that to your partner. And that's when you can start creating a contract that actually works for both of you.
But the book doesn't sugarcoat it. They admit that changing these deeply ingrained patterns can be really tough.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It takes work from both sides. You both have to be willing to compromise and let go of maybe some old beliefs. It can get messy sometimes, but in the end, it can make your relationship a lot stronger.
So for those guys out there who are ready to tackle those covert contracts, this book gives them a game plan.
Definitely. It's all about awareness, communication, self reflection,
Yeah.
and that willingness to make things better.
It's about knowing that you have choices. You know, you're not just stuck in this situation. You have the power to change things.
Right. Men on Strike is really all about encouraging men to step into their power, embrace their masculinity, build relationships that are based on mutual respect. It's about creating a world where men feel valued for who they are, not just for what they can do for others.
Well said. And for those of you who want to dive deeper into all of this, Men on Strike is available on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. It's a really eye-opening read.
It really is.
And that's it for our deep dive today. We hope this conversation has given you some things to think about, maybe even inspire you to take some action in your own life.
Keep learning, keep growing, and most importantly, keep fighting for the kind of relationships and the kind of life that you deserve.
Well said.
Mm.
Until next time.